Good morning. Welcome to the Finance Committee budget hearings. Alderwoman Finlayson and Alderman Payon are present and accounted for. I would move for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Next item on the agenda is approval of yesterday's minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval of the minutes as written.
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay. First item on the agenda is a discussion of debt affordability, and we have Ed Meehan and Bob Burden with us from the Financial Advisory Commission. They are a subcommittee of the Financial Advisory Commission that has been looking into this. So, Bob or Ed, are you prepared to give us some? Oh, I'm sorry, the city manager, Mr. Gerald.
So, Alderman Arnett, that was the issue that we discussed yesterday about having Davenport back. Since they already gave their presentation during the council work session, we thought that we didn't need them a second time.
Right. So
they're working on spending affordability, not
spending. Okay, I misread it. You're right. Thank you. All right. Well, so we do have the Davenport report in our budget book. I think they gave us a very thorough presentation, 5-page presentation. I know that Alderman Savage had a question about one of the tables, but I think we can take care of that. I think it was the table on page 4 or 5. But we can take care of that. So look, we're going to go right through this agenda today. Next item on the agenda is enterprise fund rate increases.
Mr. Chair, what about the capital budget and the CIP review?
Not on, I have debt affordability, enterprise fund rate increases, and presentation of community grants.
That's what I have.
Okay, so I must have an old. So where did we move capital budget and CIP review?
Let's ask Ms. Green that question.
Because I'm looking at the one that was highlighted.
I thought we had that today as well. And I think Director Johnson is on the call today, prepared to make that presentation.
Okay, so let's go back to the agenda then. What we're going to have the capital budget and the CIP review next. So do we need to amend the agenda to reflect that?
Yeah, I'm actually not prepared for that, but
this was the most recent agenda after we made our changes a few days ago.
I think I just left that off by mistake, but that is what you guys had on for today. And Mike Johnson is here, and we have a presentation for him as well.
mine's from Friday.
We don't have a meeting on Friday.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's proceed. Certainly, the capital budget and the CIP are very important, and as we can pick up questions as we hear. So I assume, Mr. Gerald, that next is Mr. Johnson from DPW, or are you kicking this off?
So do you want to do the CIP? Dave Hyder from Stantec is also here to do the rate. So whichever order you want to go, they're both available.
Why don't we do Mr. Hyder first? So if he has other things to do, he doesn't need. Is that okay with the committee? Actually,
I was thinking we ought to take Mr. Johnson first, since he waited around last night for absolutely nothing. Let's do him and get him back to work.
How long
against Mr. Hyder? I'm okay one way or the other, but
how long is Mr. Hyder's presentation, David?
Dave?
Good morning. My presentation will probably be about 20, 25 minutes. So I'm fine waiting. It's no problem at all. We can let.
So then let's proceed with Director Johnson and the CIP and capital budget programs. David, we don't have a fancy PowerPoint from you this year like we did last. Oh, we do. All right, here we go.
Okay. Good morning, all the members. I'm glad to have the opportunity this morning to present the fiscal year 22 capital improvement program. This the capital program is a 5-year program that goes 22 through 27. So next slide, please. This presentation is for projects that will be funded in fiscal year 22. So I will go through them and then avail myself of any questions that this body may have. If you want to ask questions at any particular point, it's your pleasure. I'd be glad to field those. So for the general fund projects, the proposed capital budget is about $11.5 million, and it's composed of a series of projects that have been in the CIP for a while, but are sort of current. So Barbwood Lane, that's about $346,500. City facility improvements, that's a standard of $500,000. Facility improvements this year is $950,000, but that's for an immediate capital infusion needed to address some assets, largely cameras that are sort of at the end of their useful life, and it will fall off in subsequent years. The City Harbor flood mitigation project, a key project.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
The city facilities security improvements was a question that Alderman Savage had. And I think I just heard you say it's upgrades in cameras.
I believe they're cameras. I think Officer Truitt, Sergeant Truitt, before he left, had been doing some work with MIT, with the MIT folks on cameras, which are sort of not reliable. I think they're either not communicating clearly or having some other electrical issues. It's largely age related. And,
go ahead.
No, sorry, please. Go ahead.
Carrying Alderman Savage's message and looking at the report from Davenport, he was wondering if this is $1 million that we really need to spend right now. And I think we'll need a little bit more elaboration on what this is all about. I would say personally that I was kind of miffed that we, the council, never got consulted by Mr. Truitt, and things just showed up. And I'm thinking mainly about the door coming from the Hillman garage into the building. But $1 million for security improvements is something I think some of the council members, and I'll include myself, would like a little more detail on, and whether or not this is something that is a must do in fiscal 22, or whether this is something that could be moved back some.
Alderman Arnett, and we are happy to provide that information. I think when we do that, you'll see that it's probably was needed last year or 2 years ago, and we're actually a bit late for this, but it not only has to do with the age and the fact that these cameras are failing just due to age, but also the quality of the camera, of the images that we're getting from these cameras. They're older technology, and as you know, there's high resolution technology that's available now that we really need. These are, as you know, these are the cameras that we use to help solve some of the crimes that we have in the city. So we really need, I think most of the cameras that we have now are in the 10 to 11 to 12 year age. And for this type of technology, that's ancient. So we really, really need this project. But we can provide a I don't know if we'll want to do that in closed session or not, but we can provide additional information.
Actually, you cleared up a lot of, I guess, a tacit assumption I made because it showed City Hall that this was all happening in City Hall. Now that you're talking about all cameras, I think it makes a lot more sense. I was trying to figure out.
It's not in City Hall at all. It's all of the security cameras that we have around town.
Okay. Still, how much does a camera cost? What is the cost per camera? I don't think they're that expensive anymore, are they?
So the camera is part of the cost, but the communication infrastructure to get the images from the camera back to the police station is a significant cost as well. So we can provide, I think it sounds like we need to do a complete brief on this project for the council, so we can do that.
All right, thank you. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Johnson.
Oh, that's fine, Alderman. The City Harbor Flood Mitigation Project, that's a key project for, addressing the nuisance flooding and tidal flooding that is happens down there, the City Dock area, Compromise Street. There's 2.7 million. Over at the Pip Moyer, the fitness equipment is again coming to the end of its useful life, and this is a recurring cost in the CIP for its replacement of a little over $50,000 a year, and that will sort of keep the equipment in good order, reduce liability, as well as sort of make it an attractive facility and useful facility for the community. General roadways, this is a standard recurring cost of $3 million. And as I go into the other slides, I'll go into a bit more detail on some changes that we're making, to the roadway program. For Hawkins Cove, $65,000. For Hawkins Cove, which is a high priority project for the mayor and council, the approach that's being taken with that is to do it in two phases. It would be a design build project, but we need to develop what are called bridging documents. And that is really where we develop the concept of what it is that really we want to build there, or could be built there. And then the bridging documents would then be given to the selected design builder to sort of develop into the final project. Doing it without the bridging document phase proved a bit difficult. Even when we spoke to consultants and contractors, they really couldn't give us a number because they didn't quite know what we wanted. Or given what was there, besides the obvious things of removing the bulkhead and things of that nature, putting in a living shoreline. But the bridging documents will kind of give us a clearer picture and help all parties to sort of make this very important project move forward. So that's what that is for. The public works maintenance.
Can I stop you, please?
Yes.
There's another cove that, for me, and some have a higher priority than Hawkins Cove, and I don't see anything. I know we had a conversation, you and I and the city manager, but I really would like to see something that puts a placeholder in for Wells Cove. I don't know what we need to do, David, to make that happen, whether there has to be a resolution, but I mean, that is an ongoing issue. Mr. Johnson, you explained that there's a lot of thinking, particularly since it might be bridging over a stormwater outfall, but I would be remiss, and I think my constituents will be stomping on my head if I don't ask that we put something in here as at least an initiation of a Wells Cove project.
So I think we obviously have two options. One would be to add it now without any real definitive cost information, just sort of a, back of the napkin number for the eminent domain if we get to that, or for the purchase, the acquisition that we've talked about. Or when we have better information, we can come forward and amend the CIP during the year to add that project. So I guess it's the council's preference for those two options.
One of the few amendments that I'll be putting forward, and $65,000 looks like a nice placeholder for Wells Cove too. And I do think we need to have another meeting sometime, city manager, to get an update on where we are. I still don't understand why we can't build over our stormwater right of way. And I think there's a lot of other people that don't understand that either, and they're going to be asking me questions. So I really will be putting in an amendment asking for some placeholder for Wells Cove. We could make it $5,000. I don't care. I can't imagine that a dock there is more than $100,000, but you know, we get surprised on these capital costs. And Mr. Johnson, you did indicate, as it was potentially bridging a catchment basement outfall, there may be other considerations. There may be considerations about how pilings can be driven around that, and I understand that and appreciate that, and that is your bailiwick for sure. But it is something that I really want to get in somewhere as something. If we end up not building it, then we don't spend the money.
Mr. Chair, I would like to mention that this Hawkins Cove is fully grant funded.
Okay. That's wonderful. And maybe we can seek some grants for Wells too.
Well, it would be program open space money for Wells. So that would also be, that's our anticipation. We've had that discussion with DNR. So that's our anticipation, would be program open space.
Okay, great. So thank you. Sorry for the interruption, but
No
that's
problem.
a must do on my list.
Okay. I made a note of it.
Thank you.
You're
Mr. Chair,
welcome.
I had a quick question.
Yes, Alderman Gay.
Thank you. And I jumped on that a little late, so I'm not sure if he explained it already. But is the $157,500 for Weems Wayland Field, is this actually moving forward with some sort of repair process, or is this a continuation of some study and environmental check?
We haven't gotten
I
there
haven't
yet.
gotten to that yet, Alderman, but it's not for the actual work. I think it's a continuation of the additional studies for capping the old landfill and addressing the environmental concerns there.
So the study is $157,000?
I believe it's part of that plus any additional testing, right? There was some money appropriated in 21. I'm forgetting the figure. I think it was 50 some thousand, if I recall. And it's all part of the environmental due diligence that is needed before the actual work. The actual work will be a lot more expensive than this amount. This is just the preliminary work, the due diligence effort, environmental due diligence efforts.
Yeah, I get that, but it's going on year 2, and we're still in the study process spending. I'm sure last year was a significant amount too, but I'll let you finish the presentation. My apologies.
No problem. No worries. The Public Works Maintenance Facility at 39 Hudson, we had requested a little $3.8 million. We just recently finished the permit set, and we have some additional costs that are needed. This figure is not sufficient. What is happening is the price of steel is rising rapidly. And we have had to take some preemptive steps by going ahead and purchasing some of the buildings. So we purchased the salt building ahead of time to try to lock in the price before the cost of steel impacted the project costs. In addition, we had to make additional changes to address concerns raised by the Environmental Affairs Committee regarding the previous location of the salt barn, which is too close to the creek head. And we moved it in a different location on site. And then we had some additional costs for certifying the building with LEED that sort of contributed to this additional cost. So based on the estimates we received just from the design development, and we just got approval from the Planning Commission on April the 1st for the project. So the permit set has just been submitted. We're looking at about needing around $400,000 more, 400 or so $1,000 more to complete the project. So this figure, I did not include it because the budget book had already been developed, but I'm just raising it here. And I guess it maybe would be addressed with an amendment. I'm assuming that would be how the appropriate way to address it. So this figure here would be about $4.3 million, and not the 3.8 that is shown here. And what we're taking as proactive and rigorous steps as we possibly can to sort of mitigate the impacts of tight supply chains, which are sort of like affecting costs, and the rising price of steel, whether it's tariff driven or whatever is happening. We're not really certain, but we were alerted by our design professionals that that's something to pay keen attention to and to try to lock in pricing where we can. Okay. The next one is, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chair, before we go on, may I ask?
Please.
Mr. Johnson, was there any cost savings because the building had to be redesigned because of the new location?
I'm not sure that I saw any cost savings when I asked for the analysis of that. I'm not certain that I did. I don't recall seeing any cost savings. No. Yeah. If I understand your question.
The original building on Spa Road had some very expensive storefront glass on it. Because that's a much different site than the end of Hudson Street, kind of out of sight, out of mind. So all of that storefront glass was removed. But there was additional design costs because the building had to be site adapted to that new site. It's a much different site. Not just location as far as how much of the public sees it, but just because of the site conditions.
And that's why I was asking, Mr. Gerald, because I knew that the design was going to change because of the new location. I just wondered whether those savings may have been offset by the cost of the engineers redesigning of the appearance of the building, or the architect, or whomever it is that does that design. So we're talking.
Construction costs have continued to just escalate. These past 5 years, it's been a tremendous escalation in construction costs, across the country. So
I'm looking at the page in our books, and there is nothing for 23, 24, 25, and on. So it appears that in 22, we're going to have that building completed. Is that the expectation?
Yes, Alderwoman, according to the schedule, the building will be commissioned in the fall of 2022. Of 2022.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Mr. Gerald,
Thank
is
you.
this the appropriate time to ask questions about any thinking on the old Public Works facility site?
I'm sorry. No.
Sure, yeah. I'm not sure we have good answers right now, but we
Okay.
can definitely have that discussion.
All right. Well, I mean, some. First of all, I guess we have to figure out what remediation. But when we're talking about affordable housing in the city, and we're talking about a built environment, this is actually quite lovely place, and it's near some nice facilities, and so I guess and I would look for some support from Alderman Gay. I think I would like to put in a marker that as we think about that spot, that would be something where the city can be proactive in directing at least some amount of affordable housing there when we get to, assuming it's going to be housing of some sort, that when we get to thinking about that redevelopment, that we think about this as one of those places in the city where we do have open space and could be thinking about affordable housing.
Yeah, and as you know, it's zoned for residential, so it seems like a good fit. And that was always sort of the concept of moving from that site to allow that to be developed for housing. I guess, the question will be whether that land is donated for those purposes or if it's, sold. It definitely has a significant value. But that's what you all get paid the big bucks for, right?
Yeah.
Is to make those types of decisions.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
And it doesn't have to be sold because, myself, Brian Callahan, and Alderwoman Tierney, we met with Delegate Vaughn Stewart out of Montgomery County last year at the height of this, or maybe a year and a half ago, at the height of this conversation, when he was actually putting in legislation in the Maryland General Assembly for government-funded housing. So that the governments can keep their property, municipalities can keep their property and use funding from the state to invest in affordable housing. So it's just so many options, but you're absolutely right, Ross. That should be affordable housing.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we keep that in our thinking. So I'm sorry, but before we go on to Robert Eads Park, I did want to ask about the Maynard Burgess house, because it looks like we're done there, but I don't really understand what done means. Does that mean the first floor is habitable? And I was thinking about that when we were talking about the need for space for both finance and law in the primary building. And what are we thinking about for that first floor in Maynard Burgess?
Happy to answer that. So it doesn't show up because there's no additional funding that's required for the first floor project. It hasn't been done yet, but it's ready to go out for bid in the very near future. That's a fairly small space. It's just going to be the first floor that's going to be fixed up. But there's going to be a HVAC system that's added. There's going to be a restroom, ADA accessible restroom that's added. But it's not a very big space. So the thought was to make it into a conference room that would be available for city use or public use, as a meeting room for different types of either city meetings or public meetings.
I know that we've had some discussions, and I'm risking a comment from my colleague from Ward 4, but is it big enough to make council office space there? That would free up our cubicles upstairs in the main building for any need to expand either finance or law.
It doesn't take much room, apparently.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we wouldn't be giving up much room, but we might not be getting much more. I just, particularly as we seem to be pushing from certain factions of the city to having branches of government, that might be the legislative branch over there. Anyway, I'm just throwing that out for thought.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Alderman Payon has had his hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry. Pease, you're going to have to shout out because I can't see you with the...
Yeah, can we just let him finish his presentation before we ask questions, which are absolutely appropriate, but I think at the end.
I feel appropriately chastised. We'll move on.
Okay. So Robert Eads Park, and that's a new park that is proposed to commemorate the community activist Robert Eads. That's $483,500. Traffic signal rehabilitation. We have a comprehensive program to update our signals, many of which have an average life that exceeds 25 years. So they're older. The controllers, apparatus are older, and are not always in the best of condition. So we have prioritized the repairs and are working through that program to bring them up to current standards. Waterway improvements, that's a standing expense related to our MS4 permit, which we have at MDE, and Weems Wayland Field, which we are working through the the environmental due diligence phase prior to initiating any construction work. Next slide, please. So the enterprise fund projects total a little over 6 million, and they're made up of 4.9 million for water distribution rehab, 100,000 for stormwater retrofit, and MS4 for MS4 permit projects, a little over $1 million. Next slide, please. Okay, so the and I guess I'll just mention this, which I took from the budget book, and finance may be able to answer any detailed questions on this, but we'll be able to answer any detailed questions on this. For bonds, the general fund repayment is 7.3 million. This is for general fund projects. Bonds, enterprise fund repayment, 1.3 million. There's no PAYGO, grants of 1.4 million and other of 1.5 million. And the enterprise fund is made up of 3.4 million from bonds and 2.6 million PAYGO. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into the projects now. Barwood Lane, this is a long-standing project that's been on the books for a while. The design work is ongoing. Right now we have a pilot, I think, that is ending in June, I believe, or May, where the directionality of the road has been changed, and staff have, public works engineering staff have worked with Alderman Gay and members of the community to determine what exactly the scope of this should be. The project scope was finalized, and we're requesting $346,000 in this fiscal year to execute the work, to implement the work. And I think it, everyone is generally pleased with the idea that, what it will look like. And if the pilot is successful, which it appears to be thus far, I think it will be a good project. Next slide, please. City facility improvements are annual funding for major repairs to existing city facilities. We have funding of $500,000 a year. Projects planned in 22 include the fire station improvements and repairs to Gott's Garage. These had been delayed on account of the COVID crisis, and I believe that we're ready to sort of pick those back up. Next slide, please.
Well,
just one note before we leave, Lab, because the Stanton Center is of interest as well, and the Stanton Center project is actually part of this overall city facilities improvements. But we got $400,000 from the state for this next fiscal year for Stanton Center. So I think we talked about this at one of the last meetings, but we're going to move forward with that. We're going to award the design contract to do the design for those repairs for Stanton Center, and then move forward with that later this year. And expect to finish that up by the end of this calendar year.
Also, can we get an update? I know that I hope that the Forest Drive Fire Station roof repairs are done. And last I heard, there was still plumbing issues in the Eastport Fire Station. Can you tell us where we are in terms of all of our fire station upgrades or repairs?
Fire station, I think we had addressed largely some HVAC issues. I believe some of the work, I was told, was put into abeyance on account of the crisis, the health crisis, and we would move forward with whatever was there. The only thing I'm aware of, project that was done, was the HVAC upgrades. I'm not sure that any roofing was done that I'm aware of, but I can look into that and get back to you.
The roof at the Taylor Station was completely replaced, so that project's done.
It's done. Okay.
I think the only work that's remaining at Eastport is to do the sprinkler system, which is ironic to need a sprinkler system in a firehouse, but that needs to be done yet. So there's still some smaller miscellaneous things that need to be done at Eastport, but that takes care of the bigger issues.
So we have separate quarters now for the female firefighters?
I believe that is the project that will be done this year. That was in abeyance, and that's the project that I'm aware of that is planned for to be done this year.
I was also received a complaint about sewer backing up in the showers. I assume that would be an urgent, critical repair that has long since been addressed.
I would think so. I haven't heard any. I didn't hear any complaints from the chief or anyone from the fire, but that seems like a backflow preventer would prevent that. I mean, that would seem to be a fairly simple repair that utilities could handle. But I'll check on that. But I was not aware of that occurring.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We can bring former Chief Stokes back to complain about the fire station repairs.
Okay. Next slide, please. This is the facility security upgrades, and the funding for 22 is about just shy of $1 million, $150,000, and then there'll be $100,000 each year through 2027. The infusion, as David mentioned, was largely to deal with the public safety cameras, and we'll make a more detailed presentation to council on the details of that later. Next slide, please. City harbor flood mitigation. This provides tidal protection along compromised street, and then for the businesses and that general corridor going across into the Eastport communities. And the project costs have increased again due to supply chain effects. We are seeing that consistently across every domain, every area of construction that we're dealing with. Material prices are rising. Labor costs are also going up, shortages as the supply chain kind of regularizes itself, and probably somewhat related to what recently occurred. But that's our best guess. But what we are observing is that prices are going up. The figure, for 22 is about 2.6 million, and then an additional 4 million that will be requested in 23. Project design is almost completed, and we're ready to bid the project later this year. Be ready to do bidding later this year. We're sort of trying to coordinate it with the AMRP group to see if there are any efficiencies that can be gained, as they're also working in the city dock area, to see if there are any items that might make sense for them to do and to be redacted from our bid. But we're moving forward positively with this very important project. Next slide, please. Fitness equipment replacement, as I mentioned, this is just a standing replacement. The equipment is well used and it has a life. We just want to keep it in good order, minimize liability, make it attractive space for residents to use, and to integrate into their healthful living. And that's the $52,500 per year through 2027. Next slide, please. Our general roadways program, this is a standing $3 million a year that's included for paving streets. We have about 90 miles of streets, and we have performance goals to resurface 4.5 miles each year. And doing that will allow the city streets to be in a 20-year paving cycle. The total paving is often dependent on the street condition. And one of the things that we're looking at as we're looking at our program is that we would like to pilot a few new pavement treatments in 2022. And I'll explain more clearly what I mean by that. Currently, we use just the practice of mill and overlay. That's where we mill off like 2 inches of the deteriorated surface, and then we repave it with 2 additional inches, fix any concrete curbs, ADA ramps that are required, and things of that nature. That's an expensive way to maintain the road, and it's not always the best way that to be used. I mean, it gives a nice pristine surface, but it's not always necessary. There's some other treatments that we would like to pilot, and these are like using micropaving. The micropaving is where we use a thinner layer of asphalt. It's quite thin, but equally strong, and it is used for roads that have a better condition. They don't have to really meet the threshold for milling and overlay, and it provides a very good surface that probably has a life of 15 or so years, roughly, depending on use, and it will stretch our dollars, our scarce dollars, to sort of allow us to cover more miles of roads that are paved. In addition to that, we use currently an index of remaining service life, and this year we're going to also introduce something called the Pavement Condition Index, which is a rating from 0 to 100, where 0 is a failed street, theoretically, and 100 is a perfectly pristine street, theoretically. And it's gradated. The gradations go between 0 and 100 based on the condition, and there are certain thresholds that allow the pavement managers to indicate to the pavement managers as to the overall condition of the street and what appropriate treatment is needed to maintain the roads in a certain good order. Coming out of this, once we have done the PCI, we will come back to council to get some consensus on what is felt to be an appropriate PCI level for the city streets. Many agencies agree that somewhere in the 70s turns out to be a pretty good number. Many agencies use that, but it's often a local decision. There are no agencies who really want 90s or 100s because it's not, you really don't need your street to be that, brand new. But it's something that we work collaboratively with, the city manager and members of council to come to a consensus on what standard you want the roads to be at. And that's helpful to us for a couple of reasons. Not only does it, do you understand what we're doing when you see the crews are out working, but it also allows us then to program money in a way that will allow us to achieve the desired outcome that the council has wanted for our streets. So that's something that we're working on this year. Next slide, please. The Hawkins Cove restoration, the Hawkins Cove is fairly silted in, as you can see in the picture in the bottom right. There's a boardwalk, a sign of an aging boardwalk that goes out into the silt. I don't think it's really a navigable channel most of the time, and it has a failing bulkhead, and it's a site that is sort of begging for some redevelopment. So it's proposed that we would, in general, we'd remove the failing bulkhead and replace it with a living shoreline, improve the dock, and possibly look at least make an application to DNR for some form of dredging of the channel so that boats can come in. Now, that can be a lengthy process from what I understand. It can take somewhere between 3 to 4 years to get on the list for dredging, but unless the city took it on itself. But still, it's somewhat of a lengthy process. There are lots of permits involved, and the spoils that you remove have to be rigorously tested and taken to the appropriate landfills and things of that nature. But basically, there are lots of opportunities here, but it is important to have the bridging documents that I mentioned, whereby we provide with the design builder with a general idea of what it is we want. If they feel when they looked at it that they could improve on the idea, of course, we'd be amenable with community involvement to entertaining what they've come up with, but it allows us to sort of have a general roadmap of what we're planning to do with this kind of a project, as opposed to giving it to them and saying, build whatever. Because when we spoke with them, they really were uncomfortable with that for good reasons, that they really could not come up with a number that, because we didn't know. And it made it hard for us to compare because we're not comparing apples to apples. Each person would come with a different idea with a resulting different cost. So this allows us to come up with a general idea, allows all bidders to be bidding on this more or less the same project, and then we would get the best price that way. So that's the plan with that. Next slide, please.
Mr. Johnson,
Yes.
on this, this focuses on the water side. Are there dollars in here for improvements on the land side as well? And I'm seeing what seems to be a developing debate over whether this land side becomes a greenway or whether it will have some amenities to provide landside use. It's very close to Eastport Terrace and Harbor House, and I don't know whether this grant money speaks to that at all. And if not, do we need to start thinking about what we're doing with the land side in this area?
Alderman, it does include the bridging concept would include some landside improvements, amenities added, things of that nature that would sort of enhance the entire experience of a resident using this particular facility. And that's really why the bridging documents are key to sort of getting something that everyone is sort of playing from the same sheet of music, so to speak. So it does include that. This money would just cover the concept that we want, which would be sort of serve as the bridge. And then that concept would be provided to the respective design builders to compete on what, to give us pricing on what they feel it would cost to deliver deliver a finished product to us. But it does include landside, to answer your question directly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, if I could. So we're looking at a timeline of about 2 to 3 years for this project.
Not 2 to 3 years for the project. The dredging is actually the part that is very time consuming, I believe, from what I understand. And I'm sort of becoming more au fait with the requirements, the DNR requirements. But from what I've gathered thus far, that part is a lengthy process. I think the actual construction of the living shoreline and the removal of that can probably occur within a normal construction season once we have the bridging documents done, which should take a few months to be completed. And then we would then be able to bid those and get someone, to do the work roughly within a year. But to actually have boats come in to the come closer in to the bay here would seem to require some dredging. From what I'm seeing, there's a lot of silt that is there. And that is the lengthy part.
I remember that conversation, and I wasn't sure if we had gotten to that point of going ahead with dredging because of the cost that would be associated with it. And I was under the impression that they were just going with a living shoreline and, really just enhance the area, some park benches and all of this stuff that offers you an opportunity, at least to kayak or canoe or something, or small water activities. But if the dredging is in the plans, then that's great. I mean, can't beat that.
Well, the living shoreline, and so it could be done in 2 phases, if you will, if you want to put it in that way, if you want to describe it in that way, where the first phase would include the living shoreline, the removal of the bulkhead, the construction of the living shoreline, the amenities that allow you to launch kayaks and so on. But if there was a desire for boats with a deeper keel, I'm not really a boater if I'm describing it correctly, right? To come in, dredging might be required, and that might be a second phase that might be have a longer timeline, given the environmental concerns that are associated with removing in situ silt. They have to be tested and permitted and taken to the appropriate facilities, and that can take some time. So, what you described can be done fairly quickly within a construction season or so, but the actual dredging part where you could bring your boat into deeper water might take a bit longer.
Yeah, and that's expected. And just one last question. After the $65,000 is used, which I believe an attorney was on saying that was all grant funding, the city would have to then pick up the tab for remaining construction costs, or we could pursue additional grant funding, correct?
We would probably work with the Chesapeake Bay Trust and apply for a grant. We would then be in a position to apply for a grant through them to finance some of this work. And there may be other sources as well that could be used, waterway improvement funds. There are a series of grant fund sources that are available to allow us to build what we've designed, what the design builder designs.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. This is the Public Works facility. As I mentioned, we need an additional roughly $400,000 to add it to this facility. The project cost is increased due to inflationary effects, additional stormwater requirements, whereby we had to move the structure. If you look at the graphic on the bottom, the salt barn, which is shown in the back, in the rear, the upper right corner, had been closer to the creek in an earlier iteration. So that was felt to be, and the Environmental Affairs Committee was correct to point that out, that was not the desirable location. So we relocated it and put in some additional controls to protect against any salt intrusion into the water body where this is situated nearby. So that added costs. We're also seeing rising steel costs, and I think that's a global phenomenon. Certainly, it's affecting us. One of the changes that that we made to the structure is we developed a new salt barn, a new salt storage structure, and I'll give a sense of why I felt it was necessary, why we felt it was necessary. If you look at Spa Road, you'll see that we do have a dome there, but that dome is an older dome, probably looks like some of the vintage of the 70s or 80s, if I were to date it. And in that time, the philosophy was different. The domes were built in a way that they were just designed to maximize storage. And the way in which you loaded it is that salt trucks that came in, they normally come in, bring in about 75 or 80 tons at a time, and they would tip it onto the ground. Then staff would push that salt into the barn, into the bin with the loaders. And what invariably happens as you have more and more salt, as the barn becomes fuller, it becomes harder to push that in, and you have more salt that is sort of left outside in front of it. When it rains, that is sheet flowed into the water bodies, like the creek head that is near Spa Road. So that structurally has a problem with that type of a barn. This barn that we have here is big enough that the salt delivery vehicles can enter the structure before they offload. It's high enough that they can sort of offload inside the structure. So it removes the need for a lot of effort on the part of the Public Works Department to push that salt inside the barn. There might be spillage, but our general housekeeping rules would address that, as well as the other controls. So we feel that this was a superior structure that sort of was in the spirit and of what the EAC wanted, and the permit requires us to do regarding, not contaminating surface water. So that was a merited, I felt, cost. And then also the removal of the fuel system at Spa Road. This project also includes the retiring of the tanks at Spa Road. Spa Road's tanks are old. I'm not sure that we have good records as to how old they are, but we know that they're pretty old. And at some point, they're not going to be able to take fuel because we won't be able to insure them. So those tanks will have to be removed. And that cost is sort of folded into this project currently. So that is sort of the explanation for the increase. The project is expected to be, design is expected to be completed this fall, with construction completed roughly about a year later. And we will continue operating at Spa Road and Chinquapin Round Road until completion of the project. One of the items that we would like to do in addition at Spa Road is that our current bin here that salt bin is designed to hold about 800 tons of salt. And that is probably a season's worth of salt. Given the last winter, this recent winter, there were periods when we were very low on salt. And this happens periodically. And we had to use the the good offices of Director Kevin Simmons to assist us with getting salt from other partners, because the suppliers just weren't delivering certainly to the small guys like us. They were probably delivering to DOT, but not to us. So we would like to continue using the salt barn at Spa Road as a backup salt storage. So it gives us more than 1 year's worth of salt. So it helps us to mitigate against another regular winter where salt becomes a scarce commodity to get our hands on. It would sort of help the city in terms of our operational planning. We understand fully that at some point, Spa Road would be repurposed for some other reason. At that point, we would then retire the salt barn. But even though staff would no longer be at Spa Road, we would be storing supplemental salt there as a mitigating effort against shortages. Next slide. Yes.
I have a question regarding that. Wouldn't that delay any attempts for the city to move forward with potential projects on the Spa Road site? I'm assuming that some sort of environmental mitigation would have to be done for a salt dome as well. So then wouldn't we have to wait until the salt dome is completely deconstructed, it's all cleaned out, they check the area?
Alderman, I don't believe that the PW operations would affect the city's strategic efforts to dispose of the property as it sees fit. We would just be notified that that we need to vacate it at some appropriate time, and we would then just change our operations to be able to do so.
So the site as it sits with a salt dome on it, and the activity there is with an environmental compliance for residential units to be built there?
Yeah, it would not be, but as in the development phase, if a developer is coming in and they begin to do their designs, they would come in and do whatever testing is needed, and if they needed the dome removed, I don't think they would to really do due diligence testing. We could accommodate that. We would just need sufficient notice to be able to move our stockpile of salt somewhere else, either into the existing dome. We wouldn't take deliveries. We would just move the existing salt over to the Hudson Street barn and store it there. But I don't think that's a major problem. That's a bit of a operational logistics issue that we could address fairly efficiently. I don't think that would in any way impede a developer from pursuing a design of projects on that site.
I hope it doesn't. It doesn't seem very attractive, and it seemed like it would create time delays. But thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next slide, please. Robert Eads Park, and this park is in honor of the vigorous community activist Robert Eads. It's proposed to be constructed on Clay Street. I think it's a quarter-acre park. Looking at the schematic that was developed by an architectural team, it would improve both visual and ADA access to the water in that area. And the funding request is $483,500. A project initiation form has been submitted for consideration, which it was well done. And the project initiation form is part of the new process that we're using for many of our CIP projects, and I'll just briefly explain what that is. One of the challenges that we have in our CIP is that we have things in the CIP that are not fully scoped. They're sort of like placeholder projects, and they're probably staying in the CIP possibly a bit too long than they should. One of the ways to address that is to ensure that projects that are in the active CIP have good scopes, because once they have a well-developed scope, our engineers can then build the project, get it done. So the first phase in any project is to sort of develop what is called a project initiation form. That starts the process. And what that does is it allows everyone to take a look at the project and sort of to think in broad strokes as to what really the scope should be, what really do you want at the site, what sort of order of magnitude of cost should we incur, are there any sorts of key political or environmental or other issues that we should consider or that need to be considered? Are there stakeholders who should be managed or who have are opposed it or pro it, for it, and things of that nature? You sort of begin to take a holistic look at the project. And then if that is approved, we then move through different phases of developing a full scope until we have a scope that our engineering staff can use to either design the project and or get it built. And that would sort of move things through the process a lot faster than sort of just starting with an idea where the engineers then have to go through this process. They basically have to go through the same process, except that they're doing it at the wrong phase, I think, under the current way in which we have been doing the CIPs. So this PIF was submitted by Parks and Rec. It was very well done, and I think it could serve as a model for all other departments to use, or even our staff to use in developing a PIF. And I think that it's a well done project, which sort of lays out exactly what we need, and it allows us to get it done fairly quickly. Next slide, please. Traffic signal rehab. The city owns and operates 24 traffic signals. And as I mentioned in the preamble, many of them exceed an average age of 25 years. And that's quite old for traffic signals. And it will, you have, in looking at the inspection reports, you find that there are deterioration to the support structures, to the anchor bolts, things of that nature, some of the electrical and controller cabinets, and so that seem to be have dated wiring and logic systems in them. And one of the bigger, I guess, challenges with that is that our signals, due to age, cannot communicate with the Anne Arundel County signals. I know that I think I've heard council ask about a few signals, why they can't be sort of integrated. I think that has something to do with it. They just are too old, a different generation of signal, and they can't really talk to each other. So what we've done is we've developed a prioritized listing of signals for rehab, and the worst of the signals are the four in Church Circle. They have the greatest priority for work, and those are scheduled to be rehabilitated in 22. The funding requested for that is $685,000, and additional funding, a little over $500,000, will be requested in 23 and 24, and that number will be roughly around that for 25 through 27. But it gives us an organized way to sort of get our signals up to current standards, meets current safety standards. Next slide, please. Waterway improvement projects. We receive annual funding from DNR for state waterway improvement through state waterway improvement grants. And these are used largely for bulkhead rebuilds, floating docks. There are some of the floating docks we're considering are Cheston, 6th Street, the Wells Cove. I mean, we can be added to that. Thompson Street Conduit, 3rd Street at Spa Creek, MS Garrett Park, and so on like that. And the funding of $262,500 is requested in fiscal year 22. And this would be an ongoing project as we sort of focus on providing greater access to the waterways of the city. Next slide, please. Williams Wayland Field. So this was a trash incinerator in the 40s. It probably did not have a liner. So it certainly didn't if it was built in the 40s. And so you may have, I believe you may have groundwater contamination that maybe have to be addressed and mitigated. MD is reviewing the mitigation plan data to determine the extent of mitigation that's required. And additionally, the funding that is requested is to complete the environmental due diligence and to see whether or not a simple clay cap or dirt cap or something that would suffice, or if there are any other mitigation requirements that the Maryland Department of the Environment has. Following that, we would then be in a position to request funding to actually do the mitigation. But this is a key due diligence phase that would allow us to be ready to do that. Next slide, please. Our water distribution rehab. So our water assets are replaced according to a comprehensive plan coming out of our asset management practice that we've recently adopted. And we are requesting $4.9 million every year, 22 through 27. And your requested funding will be split between bonds and PAYGO in a $3.5 to almost $3.5 to $1.5 million split between those. This is essential as Annapolis has very old, being an older city, colonial type city. It certainly has piping that's quite old in some places, even though functional. And one of the, weak points of any system like that is the valve technology. The valve technology has improved immeasurably over the years. Some of the older valves, when they're exercised, the bonnets, the head of it can come off, or it can cause problems with the line, breakage in the lines and things like that. So, the sort of modernizing key components of the system is key to ensuring that we provide wholesome water and reliable water service to our residents. And that's what this project allows. Next slide, please. Our stormwater management retrofit projects, these are our projects that replace components of our storm drain system called the MS4 system, Municipal Storm Separate Sewer System. That's the technical name for the storm sewer system. And the funds are typically used to repair failures in the system. We're requesting $100,000 annually from the Watershed Restoration Fund, and this is just PAYGO. Funding is PAYGO from the fund. Next slide, please. The big issue that we're working on now is our MS4 permit, coming into compliance with that. This request funds projects from the city's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, or MS4 permit. It gives us an ability to introduce new or to repair existing best management practices, which are used to control the amount of nitrogen, potassium, phosphorate, and other soils, and so that could foul the Chesapeake Bay. And the funding is provided in an amount of a little over $1 million, and that's requested annually from the Watershed Restoration Fund, and that is a PAYGO from the fund. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. Yes. Okay. I think that's it. So I think I went through that. So are there any questions?
Yes, I have one. Mr. Johnson, going back to the construction on Hudson Street, we put the plans before the Admiral Heights Improvement Association and the West Annapolis Civic Association, and my constituents are most concerned about the environmental effects of the our department there. Are we still attempting to get a gold designation? I can't remember the name of the award. Is it LEED?
LEED, L-E-E-D, yes.
LEED, okay.
LEED, yes.
How does that look now that we're planning the project and we'll be putting a spade in the ground before too long, hopefully?
We looked at it, Alderman, and the road to LEED is very, very difficult for a project of that at that location and of that type. I don't feel that LEED gold is easily attainable there. In fact, we have a very, very slim chance of attaining it, if at all. Part of it is how the LEED, like for instance, if the project were, say, in downtown Baltimore, where it is closer to traffic, to transit routes, like you have the light rail, you have bus routes and so on like that, it would give us more points. We would not get any of those points at that particular location. So given that it is a utilitarian structure and some of the aspects of the lead what you call it, a scorecard, are not easily attainable, we feel that a certification at LEED Silver, which is above what the city's code requires. This certification is not really required by the code, but we would go for a certification at LEED Silver is the more achievable objective that we could attain there. That is something that looks like we have the points to attain that.
All right. How will we be handling erosion and stopping a buildup of silt? The county's done a pretty good job finally at putting in some waterworks and damming some of the water and doing many other things they should have done a long time ago. Will we be affecting any of that work? Do you know? This was work they did in the headwaters, I don't know how else to describe it.
Their stream restoration, project? Yes.
Yeah.
No, this project would not at all impact the stream restoration. There's a limit of disturbance that is established by the Soil Conservation District, and the contractor would be required to work within those limits and to provide the appropriate erosion sediment control protections that would prevent any interference with the work that is done with the recently restored stream. So I don't see there being any chance of us causing any problems to that particular project that was completed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair, my hand's up.
Yes, I know. I'm trying to find my mute button. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, talking about the Public Works facility, have we, and maybe City Manager Gerald can answer this also, are we looking at using any pervious surface that might be more environmentally protective? I know there's a cost difference in using pervious over impervious surface, but is there at least a look at what the value would be for us?
Now, Alderman, we did look at that, and the ground, the soil does not have the percolation rate capacity to accommodate that particular BMP. It cannot work there, and it was something that we had the team look at. I think that it perks only at about 1 inch an hour, which is not sufficient. We cannot, by the state code, we cannot use that there. But in addition, the type of facility that we have there, we had other concerns, even if it did perk. The Public Works yard has a very high percentage of very heavy vehicles that are using that. And that sort of BMP does not seem well suited. It's going to deteriorate over time. Its performance, in the beginning, it would work, but then over time, the maintenance costs and the general operational impact of having those very heavy vehicles use that seemed to be something that was a greater concern for us. There was some mention that it could have been put in the parking areas for cars. It's something we could have looked at if it perked, but the soil doesn't, it's not really an issue because the soil can't really accommodate that BMP. So we did look at it and it failed, unfortunately. It's not something we could use.
Thank you. It is something that I hope we will try to impose on all projects, not just city projects, but private projects also. I know there's a cost differential, but there's a greater impact on the environment when we can do that. That may take a action from the city simply to make a strong recommendation for any projects that they attempt to use pervious surfaces when they can. 2 other questions. Maynard Burgess House. And again, I think this is to City Manager Gerald. Is the second floor not intended to be used at all?
So the thought on the second floor is to keep it for preservation purposes because it really sort of depicts how that building was when it was being used. So the biggest problem is to get ADA access up there. So we would have to put an elevator in, and an elevator on the first floor would take up a lot of the floor space. It's a very small building, and to install an elevator would take up a lot of space. So the thought is to not make it a usable space, but just leave it in the current condition. And it could be used for storage or for display of, some of the artifacts that we have. So people that were able to go up there, but it wouldn't be available to the public because then it would have to be ADA accessible.
Okay. I like the idea of it being a display area or kind of a museum piece of the building. And Alderman Arnett is absolutely correct. I do not intend to go over there for my office space. So just for the record. My second,
see the displays.
I pictures work, and I'll go and do that, but I'm not going to live over there as office space for me. I will definitely go there for meetings and the like. My last question has to do with Russell Street. I'm sorry, Alderman Payon, were you saying something?
No, I was just going to say, if we go across the street, it will give us an extra 3 inches of desk room. Come on.
Yeah, well, okay. My last question is about Russell Street. It's in the book, but I noticed, Mr. Johnson, you didn't mention it as one of your priorities. What's the status of that? I mean, we've been waiting and the poor residents of Bates still can't get to West Street safely in the, shortest distance.
It's not a 22 project. I don't believe, from my understanding or discussions with staff, that a real scope is understood as to what is needed over there. So I think that would be something that we would scope this year. Would probably plan to work in it in 23. Probably do it in 23. I don't think anyone knows exactly what is wanted for Russell Street in speaking with staff. So,
Mr. Gerald, can you help us out with that? I remember the last you said you were trying to negotiate use of the land from the private owners on Russell Street.
Right, and I think Marcia Patrick, I think I saw she's on here, and she probably would know better than me. But so a couple of things about that. It's not listed on that list that Director Johnson showed because we're not asking for new money. So those aren't the priority lists; those are just the new money list. The issue with that has been to try to determine who owns the land that we're trying to improve, that we're trying to add sidewalks to. I'm not sure where we're at now. I kind of lost track of that over the last year, but that was the problem for years of trying to, the land ownership records for that street are extremely unclear. And I don't know if they've been sorted out since I moved jobs, but that was the ongoing issue with trying to do that project.
I would think that as the city, our planning department would be able to help us with that. And
it would actually be Public Works, and we
okay,
because we keep all the land records, all the as-built drawings, and all of that, and we weren't able to sort through that, at least as of a year ago.
Okay, well, I guess it goes back to Mr. Johnson. I would appreciate an update on the status of those sidewalks on Russell Street.
Okay, I will check and get back to you with an answer on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Speaking of updates, I just wanted to ask again about the status of the satellite stations. I think there's one in Eastport, and I think there's another one. I think I remember something maybe from Ms. Evans about that, but are we still waiting for furniture to get that Eastport Community Center open?
No, so the furniture is all in. The police are using the one that's at Harbor House. We're still waiting to get Wi-Fi installed. So we have the same problem that you have at your home of trying to get Comcast to come out and install that. But we're planning to have a grand opening. I think on May 7th was the date that I saw. But both of those units have all of the furniture that they need. Both of them are getting the Wi-Fi installed and are ready to go. We also have the vehicle, which is going to be sort of I forget what we're calling it, a wellness vehicle, I guess, It's all the way complete except for we're putting a wrap on it to make it distinctive. So that wrap hasn't been installed yet, but that will be done by the grand opening on the 7th. That's really the critical path for the grand opening. We wanted to have that done as well, so it's sitting outside the resource center. But otherwise, it's Wi-Fi and that vehicle. They're being used already. They're fully operational, except for the Wi-Fi.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question on that point.
Please.
You mentioned the police are using that one. Why would the police be using it if it's a resource center?
Well, that was the whole purpose that HACA set those aside, was for a police substation. So that's how we were able to get them through HACA. So police have half of the unit, and then the other half is the community cares part of the operation.
Alderwoman Tierney, if Alderman Gay is through. Please, Ellie.
I have nothing more to say.
All right. Thank you. I'm still lost in a daydream on the corrosive nature of salt and the joys of micropaving. This is my favorite subject, the capital budget. I'll be quick. I know we have an agenda, but our trending on PAYGO, I was on slide number, where do we address PAYGO? Slide 4. Has PAYGO remained, I guess this is an accounting question, and I know it's always been an issue and sort of a logic to our potential budget increase. Has PAYGO remained steady? Have we increased PAYGO or decreased PAYGO, or what's our strategy with that?
I believe that it's very close to what we had last year. The way I estimated our 22 availability was based on what we had used in 21, but I'll have to open up that spreadsheet to be sure. It's coming from the Capital Reserve Fund. And as you know, there's likely to be more in there at year end, unused.
Okay, so we're monitoring that basically and making sure we have a firewall there.
Knowing that we were going to have a tight budget in 22, we tried to make that at least what we had in 21 with no additional use of the fund. So that was our goal.
Thank you, Jody. Slide number 8, the Compromise Street project. And if the public is watching, please don't confuse this with the City Dock project. But on that, do those numbers on slide 8 include the recently announced state allocation from the senators? David?
So part of that additional funding will come from that 1.2 million from the state.
Okay. It's just not, okay. That's not, it's just not showing here.
I think when we put the CIP together, we didn't know that we were getting that 1.2 million.
Right.
So we'll have to
adjust
amend the CIP to reflect that. But yeah, that'll be a portion of that.
Okay. And then my last question is on the traffic signals. I see that we have 24, and Church Circle got to the top of the list. Is there a close second?
Is there a close second?
Yeah.
There is. I didn't have it. Just let me see if I can just take a quick look and see where it is. There is a close second. Give me 1 minute. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Or I can get back to you if I don't find it.
Yeah, I just need a plan B on the potential reaction to the Church Circle one.
Yes, I mean, you know, an entire rating had been done of all, and some are in very good condition, and you know, there are others which are in need more immediate work. I mean, delay costs money, and I'd rather bait and switch than to delay. But anyways, that can be under separate cover. So thank you very much. You're welcome.
Good to see you all again.
So before we close out this section, there's the actual capital budget numbers are laid out on pages 10, 11, and 12 of the budget binder. Are there any questions from the committee or others about those pages? Pretty straightforward. Nothing new there, but
Nope.
failing that, let me ask the committee, are we ready to move on to Mr. Heidler's presentation on the rate setting?
Yes. Mr. Chair, let me remind you that there's a presentation on the Robert Eads Park at 1 o'clock that I need to attend. We need to move.
Couldn't agree with you more. So let's move to Mr. Heidler. Thank you for your patience and listening to this discussion of our capital program. I thought, Mr. Johnson, I want to thank you for your presentation. It was very thorough, and I do want to ask how I can get a PIF form so I can fill it out for Wells Cove. But other than that, I think we're ready to move on to enterprise fund rate studies.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Can everybody see the screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Sir.
Okay, perfect. All right, I will try to keep this as brief as possible, and we'll do have a fair amount to cover, but we'll get through it quickly. So in terms of our agenda, we're going to talk about the water and sewer funds first, and then we'll jump into the stormwater fund, and then we'll wrap up with looking at the refuse fund. And I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm getting some feedback. Okay, great. All right, before we jump into each of those funds, I wanted to talk a little bit about the just the overall plan in terms of how we look at revenue sufficiency and financial plan development. And so really there's three main components. There's the development of the revenue requirements. And what that is essentially what's the cost of providing each of the services. And that includes expenditures related to operating and maintenance, existing debt, as well as any capital improvement plans, plus any future debt that would be required. Then the next step is essentially to look at, okay, what are our revenues under our current rates, given what we're looking at in terms of demands for service, our customer counts, and things like that. So that's essentially a forecast of revenues at current rates. And then we compare those to the revenues and the revenue requirements to determine whether we're meeting our financial metrics for each of the funds. So that would be looking at, are we maintaining our minimum reserves? Are we able to meet our debt service coverage? And that's particularly important for the water and sewer fund. So that's the overall approach. And we do use a financial model for each of the funds, looking at over a 10-year period to provide that long-term look and sustainability within the funds. So first fund is the water and sewer fund. And just to take a quick look at the 2022 water revenue requirements. So this again is the total cost of providing water service in fiscal year 22. And you can see that consists of three components: O&M expenses, existing debt service, and cash funded capital. And that's essentially PAYGO. So about half of the expenditures are related to O&M, operations and maintenance of the system. Then we do have existing debt service that we have to pay, and then that cash funded capital. So totals in fiscal year 22, about $9.65 million for water service. And then the revenue requirements on the sewer system, there is no PAYGO for this particular year. We're looking at operating costs of about $6.4 million. So that by far makes up the biggest component. And then there is a little bit of debt, a little bit less than $1 million in terms of existing debt service for the sewer fund. So the next step is essentially to look at the revenue requirements and the revenue sufficiency. So this is for the water system. So up at the top, we have our operating expenditures beginning fiscal year 22, 4.8 million. That's estimated to grow to about 6.2 million by the end of the projection period. And that's due to inflation and increasing cost of operations and maintenance. We have our capital expenditures, which includes that PAYGO amount, annual PAYGO plus any existing and projected debt service that's associated with capital projects. And that's primarily, as Mr. Johnson mentioned, the distribution system improvements. So we sum that up, we get our total capital expenditures. Operating plus capital gives us our total water expenditures. And you can see that's grown from 9.65 up to almost 13 million by the end of the projection period. And the important comparison here then is looking at our water revenues in comparison to our expenditures. And what we see is that in each of the years, our expenditures on the water system are exceeding our water revenues. This does assume that water rates are not increased. And
I'm sorry, say that again.
Sheila, you need to mute.
Sorry. You also notice that water revenues are declining, and that's because we're just generally seeing a reduced usage on a per account basis over history. And we anticipate that that's going to continue as folks use less water, more efficient water fixtures, things of that sort. So that's the 10-year forecast for water. The 10-year forecast for sewer, again, we have our operating expenditures, 6.4 million going up to 8.76. We have our capital expenditures, which total a little bit less than $1 million in fiscal year 22. And then so our total expenditures for sewer about 7.39 million, going up to a little bit over 11 million by the end of the projection period. Unlike water, in fiscal year 22, we are showing that our current revenues from sewer rates will be sufficient to fund our expenditures, but that does flip when we look at fiscal year 23 and forward. So playing this forward, the next step is to essentially say, okay, if we don't increase rates, we do status quo, it is a combined fund, we look at the fund balance. So we're beginning fiscal year 21 at about $13 million in unrestricted combined fund balance. If we play this forward, given the fact that our revenues are not meeting our expenditures, we would spend down our unrestricted cash balance to 0 by fiscal year 26. So essentially exhausting the fund. And then the other key metric is that we need to have revenues. Our net income available for debt service needs to be at least 1.5 times our annual debt service on existing senior debt. And we can see that given this forecast, by fiscal year 27, we would violate that covenant. And so given those results, what we're projecting and forecasting and recommending is for fiscal year 22 to do a 3% increase in water rates, keep the sewer rates as they are, because as I mentioned, they're sufficient to meet the expenditures. And if we do that, as well as some future increases, we believe you will need to continue to increase water and sewer rates as we showed in the forecast, that would provide sufficient funds to meet the operating costs, the existing debt, and provide funds for future capital investments. And so what this looks like with the recommended plan, so this would include the 3% in water in fiscal year 22, plus the no increase in sewer, and then ongoing increases of about 5% in water and 3.5% in sewer. We would be able to maintain a cash balance over time. The city does evaluate this on an annual basis, so we would want to continue to monitor it going forward, but we would maintain that cash balance, and we would meet the 1.5 debt service coverage with those increases. So what this essentially looks like, this is what the recommended rates would be. So this is with a 3% water increase that would apply to both the fixed charges as well as the usage rates. And then the sewer charges would stay the same. It's important to note that sewer rates were not increased last year either, so they've been held constant for the last 2 years. And where the rubber meets the road is what does this look like to the average residential customer? And that's what's shown here. Your typical residential customer uses about 12,000 gallons per quarter. And so their current bill on a quarterly basis right now is about $62. And with a 3% increase in the water rates, that would go to just about $65. So that turns into about $2.40 per quarter increase for the average customer bill in fiscal year 22. And then with the 5% and 3.5% increases that were forecasted, you can see what the resulting bills would be going forward. So that is the Water Enterprise Fund. I don't know if we want to take questions between each section or keep going to the end.
Why don't we take questions? It looks pretty straightforward, but if there's no questions from the committee or the council, we can move on to the stormwater. Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, and I'm sorry, I just had to take an emergency call from Wisconsin. Could we go back about 4 slides? Keep going. One more, I think. There was a bump up and maybe you spoke to this, and I apologize if you did, in 23 and 24, and then it goes back down in 25. Did you speak to what happened that would cause, I'm not sure that's the right one, but it's that's, maybe if you go back another one. It was where it was 147, then it goes up, and then it goes back down to 147. That's it. What happens in 23 and 24 that would increase the cash PAYGO funding of those years? And should we see that anomaly somewhere else in the other funds?
Yeah, in particular for water, I think there's just a few one-time PAYGO expenditures. This essentially, the 1.47 represents that percentage of the distribution system that's PAYGO. I believe there's components of maybe tanks and maintenance on those tanks that's occurring in 23 and 24. But then we transition back to just that component of the distribution system.
Okay, so you can explain something that has occurred to cause that change, yes, but then it goes back to normal. And I see Jody waving at me, so thank you, Mr. Hyder.
My pleasure.
I was going to clarify that he's right, that it's the water tank rehab program that's picking up the level of expenditures in 23 and 24.
Thank you, Jody.
Okay, we ready to go on to stormwater?
All right. So in terms of the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, again, similar analysis. We're looking at the revenue requirements for fiscal year 22. We have cash funded capital of 1.15 million. And as Mr. Johnson mentioned, that's essentially for retrofits of about $100,000 and then $1 million for the MS4 work. So that's what's constituting that cash funded capital. And then we also have operations and maintenance, a little bit less than $1 million. And then there's just a little bit of existing debt. A component of that is the maintenance facility. So each of the enterprise funds are picking up a portion of the maintenance facility debt service. So that's incorporated there. And so what this looks like when we forecast it forward over a 10-year period, so operating costs of about $1 million today, goes up to about 1.5 by fiscal year 30. We do have that cash funded capital, which includes the retrofits and the MS4. You will notice that in fiscal year 23, there is a bump up there. There's an assumption that there would be the purchase of a new street sweeper that would be PAYGO funded in fiscal year 23. And then we have our existing debt service, bringing us to our total capital expenditures. So total revenue requirements or total expenditures for stormwater in fiscal year 22 are about 2.22 million. And we note down below that if we keep the stormwater fees as they are, we don't have sufficient revenues as it stands right now to fund those expenditures, both in the current year and then going forward. This does assume, though, that all the capital projects are cash funded, so there is no new issuance of debt under this scenario. And so if we play this forward, we again assume no increases in stormwater fees going forward. We have a balance is a little bit less than 2.5 million at the end of fiscal year 20. We would be drawing that down, going below our minimum balance, and then exhausting the cash within the fund by fiscal year 24. Again, that assumes no fee increases and that all capital projects are cash funded. So one way to address this is to transition to funding at least a portion of the MS4 work and those retrofits with debt service. And so when we run our model and optimize for capital funding, if we fund a little bit over half of the capital projects with debt, that would lessen the burden on an annual basis on the fund and allow us to transition to increasing the stormwater fees, but allow them to catch up in terms of revenues to expenditures. And so if we take that approach, what we're recommending is a 5% increase in the stormwater fee in fiscal year 22, and that we're forecasting we're going to continue to need to increase those stormwater fees at about 5% per year over the projection period. What really drives this, though, is the continue to work on the MS4, assuming the execution of those projects takes place, and then the split between cash and bonds. If we tried to cash fund all of the capital projects, these increases would have to be quite a bit more. So it is attempting to phase in the stormwater fees and provide that balance of cash versus PAYGO funding. It is worth noting that when we presented this last year, we were projecting 5% increases. So this is consistent with what we presented last year. And so what this looks like, if you remember how you currently charge, you have quarterly stormwater fees for single family and multifamily, and then it's based on impervious surface for non-residential. The current fee for your typical single family is $19 a quarter. With that 5% increase, it would go up to $19.95. So a 95-cent per quarter increase for your typical single family residential property. And then you can see the increases that would be associated with each of the other types of properties. And I believe that is it for stormwater. So I'd be happy to take any questions on stormwater.
Hearing none.
Okay. All right, so next we will talk about the Refuse Enterprise Fund. And I just want to provide a little bit of context in terms of the Refuse Fund, and this may be well known, but the city does contract out the majority of the services provided within the refuse program. And one of the big impacts that's happened within the refuse program in the last couple of years is that the city entered a new multi-year refuse and recycling contract. And it did substantially increase the cost of the refuse program. It essentially brought it up to more comparable what other utilities pay for those services. You had a really, really good deal in the past. And so it's not that you're paying more than you should necessarily. It's just that there was a significant increase. And so to address that, the refuse fees have increased over the past 2 years to align revenues with the increasing expenditures. So what this looks like, again, vast majority is that contract O&M expenses, so about $3.4 million in terms of operating costs. And then there is some existing debt, which a portion of it is associated with the new maintenance facility. So similar forecast, revenue sufficiency for the refuse fund. We have our operating costs, $3.4 million, forecasted to go to about 4.2 by the end of the projection period. We have existing debt service. And this does increase in the future. There is a component of a future capital project associated with the organics facility that refuse would pay a portion of. And so that's factored in here and shown up in future debt. And then there's also the assumption of new refuse collection trucks that would be purchased in fiscal year 24 and then 29. And so similarly, we're seeing a similar trend here as with the other funds, is that our refuse expenditures are exceeding our refuse fee revenues. So 3.47 to 2.62 in fiscal year 22, and that gap essentially grows going forward.
Can we just take a second to talk about the new refuse collection trucks? Those are city trucks, I'm assuming?
I'm assuming so, but I would defer to Marcia, perhaps.
Yes, Alderman. Those would be for the collection in the downtown area for the crews who pick up trash along there.
Okay, we had talked about starting to put trash cans out in the various communities. Are we doing that? And if so, are these trucks that would also service that collection?
No, I'm sorry. What those? Could you explain that again, please? What the cans were going where?
Yeah. So I know Ward 8 had requested I'm not sure whether we've gotten them yet, but some street corner trash collection boxes put up that would, I assume, be serviced by these city trucks.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, I know what you're saying. Yes, they would also service those areas as well. Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a question in regards to because I did notice the increase in starting in fiscal year 24. Are the trucks a priority? What are they using now? And is the plan when you purchase the new trucks to be as efficient as possible?
Yes. Well, I mean, Alderman, we would go through a competitive process to get the trucks, whether it's purchased off a state contract, which might be the best way to do it, or if we had to do our own bid. And the trucks, I mean, have a certain economic life or service life. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And the maintenance, once the maintenance costs start to exceed a certain threshold, it makes sense for the city economically to retire the unit and to dispose of it on gov deals or in some other way, and to bring a new unit into service. So the life cycle costs are controlled. And that's really what these vehicles have a lot of moving parts. They're hard used, and that's really a way to sort of like level the life cycle cost.
So will you purchase an entirely new fleet at once, or will it be in phases?
I believe the trucks would be purchased at once. I mean, based on the price I see here, that looks like probably the cost of, if the Packer is small, maybe 2 units you could buy with that, something like that. But we would buy them at once.
So Director Dickinson has some information, and then Alderwoman Finlayson.
No, so I've got a question because I'm not sure. The initial question was if these vehicles would be owned by the contractors, right, or the city. And I assume by the answers, these are going to be city-owned trucks.
Correct.
So I wanted to know how many are being purchased and how are we purchasing them? Because if this has been talked about before, I don't remember it. And is this fiscal year 23-24 purchase?
I think that according to what I'm seeing here, there's a 24 purchase, and I would have to sort of go through Dan's spreadsheet, but I believe it is a 24 purchase. And it looks like it's...
Are we buying them with cash, or are you intending to?
Based on what I'm seeing here, this looks like roughly like you'd be paying cash for them. I mean, that's about the price. If they're small packers, that would be the price. That they seem to be in the price points for, not a commercial collecting unit, but a smaller packer that would be used in the downtown area or for.
And how many are we buying?
Based on this, it looks like it could be 2. I'm not 100% sure. Without looking at Dan's spreadsheet, I could check that and get back to you. But based on the price here, it looks for a small packer, it might be 2 units that we're buying, that we're budgeting here. I don't know if Marcia's on, if she knows more about this or not. Can I answer that?
I can speak to it as well. At least from a modeling perspective, what has been assumed was a cash purchase of a collection truck in fiscal year 24.
Is it one truck? Was it one truck?
Just one truck.
Just one truck, okay.
In 24, and then another one with inflation, assuming it would be more expensive by fiscal year 29. Okay. So it's just 2 trucks over the 10-year projection period.
Right, and they are a bit pricey. I mean, a commercial packer is north of 300,000, I believe. So that probably makes sense, yeah, to buy one unit. It's a smaller unit.
Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm a bit confused because I think I recall when we outsourced our contract for refuse, we believed that the trucks we had were old and should not be replaced, and therefore a contractor to take that over. Now I am hearing that we're purchasing trucks. So I need some explanation as to why the contractor is not doing this work for us. And, when we moved to 1 day pickup or 1 day a week pickup, this was all part of the discussion about us not needing any trucks or, minimally needing trucks. And now it feels like we're going back into the business we got out of a number of years ago. So, City Manager, Mr. Gerald, please help me.
Yes, thank you. And that's a great question. So what happened was we did a managed competition. And so the city workforce had the opportunity to bid on the contract, and they did. And I was actually on that side of the firewall to help them put together that bid. And Marcia Patrick was on the other side putting together the statement of work. The city forces were not successful. We had a very, very low bid, as Dave Hyder mentioned, a very, very low bid from Bates. And so it would have been difficult for any company or any workforce to compete against that. So they were awarded the contract. The one part of the contract that wasn't cheap was the daily collection of the downtown trash and recycling. So after a couple of years of doing it with Bates and paying that higher cost, we made the determination that it would be advantageous to the city to contract or to bring that back in-house. So we purchased the single truck and we hired 2 people to do that, and we saved a lot of money by doing that. And that continues. So every 5 years that truck wears out and needs to be replaced. So that's the replacement cycle for that single truck that's used by city crews. We have added a lot of additional cans around the city because we have that crew to pick them up. So we've added out in West Annapolis, we've added in Eastport and other locations out on West Street, additional cans that can get collected by that same crew. But that was the story. That was an expensive part because they were coming in, Bates was coming in on weekends strictly with a full truck strictly to pick up those cans. So it was much more advantageous to have the city crews do that. So we've been doing that for several years now.
Thank you. That helps tremendously. So the intent is not to build a fleet again, but rather to simply replace the trucks periodically as are needed.
That's correct. And that's why we have that scheduled in 24. I guess that's the 5-year point for the truck that we bought a few years ago.
Okay, great. Thank you.
City Manager Gerald, can we get, and I know I'm opening Pandora's box here a little bit, but can we get something that shows the location of these cans? I know most of them are downtown, and I think they're mostly in highly trafficked commercial areas. And I'm almost inviting input from my colleagues because every ward has some highly trafficked commercial areas. Do we have a plan that is going to do this throughout the city? And is that going to contribute more expense here? I would assume it would.
Well, I think they have a limit on how much they can collect, and I don't know how much capacity still remain, but we certainly can provide the list of things that they currently collect, the locations that they currently collect. I can't really speak to how much additional capacity that they have for more cans.
Okay, thank you. Are we ready to continue with the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Please, let's
okay.
Forward.
So we look at the same analysis to look at what our cash balance is today, and then what happens if we play this forward with revenues versus expenditures with no increases in the refuse fee. And we can see that there's currently a balance at the end of fiscal year 20, going into 2021 of about 3.25 million within the refuse fund. We do want to maintain a minimum balance. And so under this plan, assuming expenditures continue to exceed revenues, we would deplete the fund by fiscal year 24. And so given that that's not sustainable, we do have a recommendation in terms of the refuse fund. As I've mentioned, expenditures do exceed the program revenues, and the program expenditures are anticipated to continue to escalate given inflation. And so for the refuse fund to be sustainable, we do need to have some annual fee adjustments what we're recommending for fiscal year 22 would be a 9.5%. And then it looks like, given the trajectory of things, we would need to continue to do increases at about 9.5% in the coming years.
Is this the appropriate point to mention that even with the new contract and the new fees, we're still below the rate where we were when we contracted out? Thank you.
Perfect segue. So this gives you a historical historical look at what the refuse fee was going back. So back in fiscal year 15, it was $323 per year. It was actually subsequently reduced for a couple years. And then with the new contract, it was increased in fiscal year 20, as I mentioned, and then again in 21. So essentially with a 9.5% increase in the refuse fee to bring it up to $300 per year, that would be essentially a $26 per year increase, which is about $6 per quarter.
So Dave, if you go back even further, it was $380, I think, in 11, and then it went up to $420, I think, in FY12. And then after we contracted out and got the cost down, it dropped back to $380 that next year, and then it just subsequently dropped off until it got to $323. So the high for a single year was $420.
That's right.
May I ask, is this a lesson, looking at this bar graph, about reducing fees? Because I'm looking at 18 and 19, where we've reduced fees more than $100, actually, from at least 15, and considerably more from going back, as Mr. Gerald just said. Is it a good practice to reduce the fees to such a level, and then you have to go right back and increase them all over again, as opposed to being more consistent year in and year out?
I can offer from my perspective. I know part of the reason why the fees were reduced was because you were building up some fund balance. So revenues were exceeding expenditures, and those were building up. Generally, from my experience, though, to the extent that you can accelerate projects or things of that sort and keep fees constant versus reducing them, I would generally recommend that that's the best approach, because generally, the ratepayer will quickly forget the fact that the fees have been reduced and will be upset when you increase them. And so keeping consistent is, helpful from a budgeting perspective, and then also reduces that whiplash back and forth.
But I do think both this rate study, which I find very good and very reassuring, but also the fact that we did contract out, we had that agreement where we would find new jobs for the people that were displaced, is an excellent example of good governance. And I think we should pat ourselves on the back. I can tell you I already had 2 questions, and it was from constituents, and it was nice to point out that even with these increases, we're not at the 420 level that City Manager Gerald gave us in his PowerPoint slides, and that sort of silenced some grumbling. Sort of like, we could be back there and escalating with the cost of doing living and be somewhere around $500 as opposed to moving up to $300. Jody?
Yeah, I was just going to point out also these numbers you don't see the inflation, because even from FY15 to FY22 there would be some inflation that hasn't shown up in our rates. So we're well lower than what we had even in 15 from an inflationary standpoint.
Okay. Where are we on the presentation? Looks like
that is it. That's it for the refuse fund. So I'd be happy to take any questions on the refuse fund or in general.
Dave, you probably didn't expect a question from me, but I have a question.
I did not.
So we're proposing to build a new food waste and biosolids facility. Can you describe how you've included that in the study, both from a revenue perspective, but also from a cost perspective of the cost of that facility?
Yeah, so what we've included is, I know there's a little bit of a, in the current fiscal year, I think there's a study or some design work for you're talking about the organics facility, I believe. And that's being split between the sewer fund and refuse. And so I think it's about $600,000 in the current fiscal year for that initial component. And then within the models and within the forecast, we've assumed that in fiscal year 24, the big expense, which I believe combined is about $6 million, split between sewer and refuse, would be debt funded. And so those are in there as it stands right now, but they're not, it doesn't really have an impact until fiscal year 24.
Revenue, you included revenues or this is beyond the scope of this study because the revenues are further out?
Yeah, we have not included revenues. So from that perspective, depending upon how significant the revenues would be, this is more conservative. So we have the expenditures in there. I'm not sure what the revenues would be and how much impact that would have.
Yeah, so for the benefit of the county to pay for the capital costs and then to share the revenue or go it alone, but it's a very interesting and hopefully another good governance project that will help with the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant as well as allow us to start collecting food waste and not send all of that to the landfill.
Okay. Again, thank you for this presentation. I think that it is us going the extra mile in our governance to have this outside look and set the fees. And I can tell you in dealing with constituents, I'm very, very comfortable saying that we take a very thorough and scientific approach to how we look at these fees. It's not determined from inside, but from an outside expert like you, Mr. Hyder. And we really do appreciate the efforts and also the clarity of your presentation. It's very easy to follow.
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. All right. I think we're ready to move on to the last item on the agenda, which is a presentation of the Community Grants Program by Assistant City Manager Lynn Farrow. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I wasn't sure you were going to get to us today, but I do thank you for indulging us. Julian, whenever you're ready, you can put up the first slide. Unless you want me to. Okay, very good. Thank you. So good morning. This is an exciting day for a number of us. We are presenting FY22 community grants recommendations from the grant review team. And all of them, I think all of them, if we're missing one person, it may be just because they had a conflict with the time, with the noon time. So, but thank you. We can go to the next slide, Julian. So this year's grant review team, and I want to thank all of them for their hard work. Each grant reviewer reviewed 6 grant proposals, and we have shared those with each of you on the on a Google Drive. So you have the cover letters from every grant proposal we received, and that cover letter includes the request amount and the object or purpose of the funding. This year, Adetola Ajayi from the mayor's office, Jeannie Conklin from the fire department, Erin Lee, our social worker care coordinator, Patty Norris from the police department, and Teresa Wellman from planning and zoning were served as our grant review team. And I also want to thank Berenice Snyder. She handles all the administrative work throughout the year, but she also was a big help this year in assembling the grant packages for each of the reviewers. All right, next slide, please, Julian. So this just outlines the process as it appears in the city code, in the city code section 6.16.060, which outlines all of the process and the purpose of the community grants. And you see here that we are able to fund both operating and capital grants. And I will say to the grant review team, if I miss anything, you guys please feel free to jump in and contribute. You can go to the next slide, please, Julian. So the community grants program is obviously subject to funds availability. And we do wait to hear what that amount will be as a part of the budget process before we consider the awards that will be made. The proposals must meet one of the following priorities: services to youth, families, and individuals that improve their quality of life and self-sufficiency, those that preserve and enhance the community's character, those that provide programs that contribute to our having a vibrant economy, and programs for community revitalization, economic development, and environmental sustainability. And as I said, this is language from the city code. Next slide, please, Julian. Thank you. As outlined in the city code, there is a grants review committee is made up of city staff. They convene and review and evaluate grant applications. The grant application is distributed widely in the community. Each of the alderpersons receive an email asking them to please share the grant application with any organizations that they would like to have apply. We also send it out to all of the previous grantees. And in addition, we send it out to grantees that have received grants from other programs. And we asked the mayor and the mayor's staff to also share it widely with the groups that they work with. Each member was assigned, as I said, 6 proposals to review. One proposal was deemed unqualified prior to that review, and the entire process, I facilitate the entire process. And the one grant proposal that was deemed unqualified prior to the review from the grants review team was an organization that provided services in Millersville and thus did not serve our residents. Next slide, please, Julian. Thank you. Alrighty, so the committee reviewed 35 applications. The total requests were $777,000, $210,000. And there were a multitude of services that requested grant funds. One nutritional program for children and youth. One nutritional program that normally applies did not apply this year. There were 4 programs that serve children and youth, 2 programs that serve families, 3 proposals for recreational programs for children and youth, 2 educational programs for adults, which is great. We had 3 homelessness and addiction prevention services programs. So that's an increase in that category this year. 4 educational programs for youth, 4 services for organizations that provide services to adults, and 12 organizations that enhance arts and culture. And that includes programs that provide arts and culture activities for youth. Next slide, please. So the committee's recommendations are based solely on the program priorities that are outlined in the city code. And the committee decided to fund 22 proposals that provide services that sustain and empower youth, families, and individuals, 4 programs that preserve and enhance the community's character, 7 programs that contribute to a vibrant economy. And we did not receive any proposals from programs that are that proposed community revitalization, economic development, or environmental sustainability. And so that is an opportunity for us. The one thing I will say, though, it's not disturbing that we did not receive those proposals because, as you know, the CDBG grant fund does provide funding for those activities as well. And so I'm not surprised that organizations didn't apply to both the Community Grants Program and the CDBG program. Alrighty, I'm happy to, if you have any questions as we roll along or questions for the Grants Review Committee, I will say that we use a scorecard for the grants review, and each reviewer scores each application and then makes a recommendation for the amount of funding that the proposal warrants. And we had 2 new grant reviewers this year, Adetola Ajayi from the Mayor's Office and Erin Lee, our social work care coordinator. Both were brand new grant reviewers. Everyone else the other team members that reviewed grants this year have done so in the past. Jeannie Conklin, Patty Norris, and Teresa Wellman have all reviewed grants in the process prior. Next slide, please. So here is the table, and you all have this also in the Google Drive so that you can see it better, and the font is larger. There are also columns for you all to include your recommendations if they are different, or if even if they aren't different from the recommendations in the mayor's proposed budget from the Grant Review Committee. There were 2 groups that received funding last year that did not apply this year. That is the Backpack Buddies from Heritage Baptist Church, and they rely really on children being in school to provide their services, and they got an award this year and have not used that money. So we will request if they want to roll that grant over to next year. And then the Peninsula Athletic League, I am told that they are now working with the Generals Highway Athletic League, and so those 2 groups have come together, and so the request came from the Generals Highway group this year. There are a number of, I see a typo in this spreadsheet, and I've changed it several times and it still is not picking up. So I will say that Peerless Friends did, oh no, it's there. I'm sorry. They were not awarded last year. They are a new group. You all are, I'm sure, very familiar with them. They are working to develop, so I guess we could almost consider that one a community development project to make their facilities ADA accessible.
Mr. Chair, if I could.
Are you through, Lynn?
Not quite. I have just one more slide, and then we can answer questions. I do want to also say that we had several new groups this year that made applications that had received funding as a part of the CARES Act grants. Co-op Anne Arundel and Superior Future and the Street Angel Project all were funded as a part of the CARES Act funding, and are now and the Grants Review Committee are recommending that they receive grants in FY22 as well. I think that was it. You can go to the next slide.
I'm sure we'll come back to this page, but
yes, I'm sure. I don't doubt that at all. So in summary, there were 35 proposals at a little over $770,000. The Grants Review Committee recommends 33 awards totaling $342,000. And I'll ask any of the Grant Review Committee members if you have anything to add, if I missed anything, or if you have anything that you think should be added, feel free to do so now. To unmute yourself and do so now. Okay. I don't see any of them doing that. And then my last slide, you can just go to the last slide. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to entertain questions.
Thank you. Thank you for this thorough presentation. Alderman Gay, I recognize, I assume you want to flip back to the page with the dollars on it?
Yeah, I just have one. I'll reveal one of my amendments to the point that Ms. Farrell made, is to completely remove Peerless Wrens, because they're applying for a community grant when they should be applying for a CDBG grant, which can be done. It's not to say that they won't get the funding. It's just in the wrong place.
I guess I would like to understand that a little bit better. I've really wanted to see Peerless Wrens develop. I think it's a rich part of Ward 8 and of the city, has a long, long history. I've often thought that we could really develop that with its connection with all the Motown people that would come in and perform there, and also perform at Cars Beach. So but
it does need dollars, and it does need investment, Mr. Chair, but CBDG dollars work directly for those type of projects, ADA accessibility, et cetera, through the federal government. That's the only difference.
Okay. Well, so we can take that up when this comes before the committee for its deliberations.
I will say that it is an eligible use for community grants.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Payon.
Thank you. Can you please tell us what efforts these different groups have made at fundraising in addition to applying for grants from us as you go along?
Sure, I'm happy to share the full grant the budgets with you from the full grant application. I don't know that I can necessarily do that off the top of my head individually for each of these groups, but I will say that each of these groups do seek funding from other sources. And we ask that as a part of the grant application for them to provide information on the other sources and the amounts that they seek from those other sources.
I've got to say that in years past, there have been a number of groups that have had absolutely minimal attempts to raise money on their own, and they're coming to us to, what some of us think are trying to make up for that. And I understand that most nonprofits should not be spending all their time raising money. They ought to be trying to, help the community the way, what their purpose is. But it's something that's important to me, whether or not they've made other attempts to raise money? Have they had fundraisers? Have they had, raffle tickets? Now, it's been a tough year for doing that. I understand that with COVID and the resultant, locking up of our local society here. But still, I'd like to know. Thank you.
Ms. Farrow, is that information that's available in the Google Dropbox?
It is not. I did not put all of the full applications, just their cover letters. But we can go back and scan the budgets so that you can see that. But that is one of the questions we ask in the grant application.
Yeah, that's what I remembered as
Right.
well.
I mean, we go through this every year. It's not a new issue or a new question by any means.
Are there other questions from the committee or the council? And if there are, you'll have to shout it out because
I do, but I think is Alderwoman Finlayson ahead of me? No, it's Ellie.
No. All
Okay.
right. Alderwoman Tierney?
Yeah. Hi, thanks. On the Street Angels, actually it's a typo, but the Street Angel project, there was a substantial discrepancy between what they asked for and what we're giving them. Could you tell us what that is, what we're ending up contributing to?
So we are, Adetola Ajayi, I think reviewed that one, I believe. And he can give you details on what we were funding, but basically they were asking mostly for salary funds, and so we are funding programmatic activities instead of the salary funds. I will say that I did speak with the director of the Street Angel Project, and I let her know when we received the application that $87,000 was would have been a very large grant, and we do not give grants in that amount.
Yeah.
Because it would take a quarter. A third of our funding away. So we thought that the $10,000 was a fair amount.
Is that Angel?
No, that is Shirley Gordon.
Okay. And two other quick ones. Annapolis, London Town, Four Rivers. What is that in relationship to community? Our community. What is that?
Yeah, so that's the Four Rivers Heritage Area, and they receive funding from the state, and that funding from the state requires that both the county and the city contribute a specific amount for them to receive their state funding.
Okay, all right, and then darn, I forgot my last one. Oh yeah, Compass Rose. Where are they existing right now? I know that it's not much money at all, but are we assured that they have a place? I mean, that's the priority right now is to
theater.
The Compass Rose Theater. Yeah.
They have assured us that they will be in operations and that they are working on virtual stuff, but that they will have a facility in FY22.
Okay, thank you.
I did speak with them, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee? Alderwoman Finlayson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question about invitations to new organizations. As our dollars have been dwindling, because at one time we were giving, I think it was 800,000 in community grants.
That's my recollection.
And now we're down to 300 and some change. And I thought, had made a decision about Annapolis-based organizations and not new organizations, but supporting those organizations that have been consistently supporting the city. So is that something that was considered with some of the new groups on this list?
So what I will say, and any of the committee members feel free to jump in here, but what I will say is that we understand that the needs of the community are changing and that there are new groups that are meeting some of those needs. And they are very important to the viability, the sustainability, the self-sufficiency of families that live in our communities. And so that is why you see some new groups here, because the needs of the community definitely are changing. And I will say that all of the groups that are new, that are funded here, were funded during through the CARES Act funding during the COVID pandemic, and did a fabulous job and continue to do great work around the city.
Well, and I'm not debating whether any of these groups have very significant and much needed programs, but the reality is that the dollars are limited. And so I think, we have to keep that in mind, but we'll come back to it. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Sure.
Okay, I think we want to thank the committee once again this year. Very thorough job. We'll look forward to seeing some of those details in the Dropbox. Are there any other questions or comments from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I did have one last question involving another one of my amendments. CRAB. I see that they're listed to get funding here. Haven't they received a plethora of city funding for various other projects? A marina?
That was state funding.
Didn't the city put a couple $100,000 behind that?
It was some
Alderman Gay, we put some of the city's program open space towards that, and the county put program open space as well.
How much was that open space?
500,000 of city program open space and 1.3 million of county program open space, and then they also got $1 million of a capital grant from the state for their construction.
But this funding, Alderman Gay, is for programs, so it's operating funds, not capital funding.
I understand that, but I'm just saying they've got $500,000 from other funding. We got to spread the wealth to all the women from Lace's point. The money's spent.
Okay, well, when this comes back on the Finance Committee agenda during our deliberations phase, that's certainly one of the things we can take up.
Greetings, Mr. Chair.
If I could, go ahead, Tola, I'm sorry.
I just want to say that Patty Norris actually reviewed Street Angel Project's grant application. But to Lynn's point, that we definitely looked at which nonprofits were actually active during the COVID-19. So like she said, the newer organizations that definitely were supporting the city, we wanted to try to help them, be sustainable for the rest of the year.
Mr. Chair, may I ask, when we access the applications, or is it the applications that we'll have access to? And is there confidential information that we will have access to?
None of the information is confidential.
Okay.
So none of the information identifies people that they serve by name or anything like that. And all of nonprofit organizations' financial statements are public because of the IRS 990 form. So, I don't want to harp on Street Angel Project, but I do want to say that yes, we did specifically look at testing supplies, materials, curriculum and supplies, and events, so those are the things that we specifically looked at, and they total $10,000.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, Patty Norris has her hand up.
Oh, I can't. All right. Please.
Thank you. And just to kind of follow up with what Ms. Farrow mentioned, the sources of funding also for the Street Angel Project, they do receive funding from the United Way, the Anne Arundel Women Giving Together, and they receives a substantial amount of money through fundraising and donations as well. That is in their budget sheet. So I know that was a question earlier regarding some of the applications.
Okay.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, committee, for job well done, and looks pretty good to me. We'll may ask some more questions of you as we get into the Dropbox and as we go into our deliberation phase. I think we already have an indication that some council members will be looking for adjustments, and that's what always happens. So we'll see how that goes. I think we have completed our agenda, and I think in a timely fashion for Alderman Payon, if he's still with us, if he wants to make a motion, that would be most welcome.
I would be happy to do that, Mr. Chair. I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, committee and council members. Good job, everybody.